Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the French Connections Friday edition. Today's date is the 10th day of February 2012. Of course, my name is Daryl Bradford Smith. It's great to have you here for another important broadcast. So much to talk about today with my guest. I have to say, watching world events of late, we are in a late hour here. All of the ducks are in a row. They've got the ability now to arrest Americans and not have a right of writ of habeas corpus to be issued if you are arrested. So that would mean you can be left in a jail cell indefinitely. Wait till they just start, shooting people dead. But and also now with the 30,000 drones that have just been approved by Congress and the Senate, going to fly over America, they'll start arming those drones with the same weaponry that they're hitting the Pakistanis with. And when things get out of hand in the country, which they will, with the 350 million private weapons in the hands of the Americans, they'll just start hitting us from the air. But all this stuff seems to be coming to a head, and then the financial side of things. Of course, if you're a French Connection listener, you know that I spend most of my time on finance. We are in some late stages in this default structure. This fiat currency structure is defaulted. It is no good. It can't be paid off, and everyone who can put two figures together with mathematics can figure out that this will never be paid off. The Greeks know it. The French know it. The Americans know it. Everyone knows it. So basically, they buy time by printing until they can't do that anymore, and that day is coming quickly as well. Again, gold and silver are something that you might want to have in physical form in your life to kind of have something to negotiate with when the final nail is put into the coffin. However, that being said, what's happening now? Will we come out the winners in this fight? Well, there are a lot of reasons why you could say no, or there are some reasons why we could say yes. The one thing I pointed out to my guest, his name is Dr. Alan Sabrosky. He'll be up with me in about 2 seconds here. I made the statement to him that every day that passes, we win converts, and they never do. The other side of this fight, the criminals, are not winning converts to their side. They're just not. It will not happen because you can't sell that package to anybody who's got a discerning mind or discerning nature. But we, on the other hand, have put out the facts. The facts are there for people to read, and we are gaining converts consistently. Will it be enough, and will it be on time? And I'm saying it's possible that it won't be. They have moved in their own right to stop us from our freedoms, and are we going to get there in time to stop them? The battle lines have been drawn, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to bring up my guest right now, Dr. Alan Sabrosky. Dr. Sabrosky, are you with me?
I am. How are you doing, Daryl?
I'm doing very well, Alan. We've been around the block with this mess. You've looked into it, and you've come up with your own approaches to trying to get the word out. But before we get started, could you give people a thumbnail sketch of some of your experiences professionally before we move on? Because a lot of people may be hearing you for the first time.
Surely, and in part because there's been a fair amount of disinformation put out by various Hasbrotypes about what I am and was. My background, 10 years in the Marines, served in Vietnam with the 1st Marine Division, went on as an enlisted man, got my bachelor's degree during those 10 years, went to the University of Michigan for 2 master's degrees and a Ph.D. in political science, international relations, taught at assorted schools, including the Military Academy at West Point, Georgetown University, the Army War College. I'm a 1986 graduate of the Army War College, and I currently have a computer business. Do writing on international affairs more in the last 3 years than for the previous decade, and except for a very brief piece on 9/11, done a few after the attack at the request of a local journalist, I really didn't look at it or pay any attention to it until the Israeli onslaught on Gaza, cast lead, sort of directed my attention back to that part of the world. My mission right after 9/11, as I wrote in something called Early Reflections on 9/11, is that something about the whole exercise that's presented to us by the U.S. government was rotten to the core. Things just didn't make sense. And I had no inside information on it. But when I got back into it in detail 2 years later, 8 years later rather, it began to make a great deal of sense.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you looked into it, first of all, you said Israel's Mossad was the perpetrator, but I think I may be wrong, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe it was just them. I believe MI6 was involved, and I also believe that the CIA and the various other alphabet soup agencies had operatives that were either controlled by this cabal of criminals that we talk about on the French Connection regularly, but all have roots back to this Sabbatean group that we know runs our finances, media, and the rest of it, because there has been such perfect symmetry in the media's response to these things and the government's response to it that you know right away that they're working hand in glove. There's no difference between the leadership in the media and the leadership of this crime network. And if there was a difference, you would see the differences, and you don't.
Well, there are several subjects there, and this is going to be somewhat heretical to you, but finance, international or otherwise, is something that I neither understand nor pay a great deal of attention to, and it's probably due to the fact that even balancing my checkbook annually is a major exercise for me. I'm always surprised at the end of each year what I have in my account. But cabals notwithstanding, I haven't looked at it. I have a general understanding of what you're discussing with that, and also about foreign intelligence agencies other than Mossad, but I haven't looked at MI6, or have I looked at the French or the German equivalents of it. So since I haven't looked at it, I'm not going to comment on them. I think when it comes to the United States, you need to make a distinction between individuals within organizations. You know, the Project for a New American Century,
yes,
among the neocons,
yep,
in highly compartmented organizations like the CIA, in which a compartment can be doing something and no one except the director, and perhaps not even the director, may be fully aware of the details of what it's doing, and the activity of that organization as an organization working for its own interest. Let me give you an example outside of the CIA. I had heard when I started working on this that a number of people say, well, this was obviously a manifestation of the military-industrial complex, and specifically of the generals, of some generals at least, who saw in the catastrophe like 9/11 the opportunity to make their name and refurbish the American military reputation and such. And I looked at them and I said, are you insane? No American military officer with a scrap of sense would contrive an incident for the opportunity to fight in Afghanistan, which was the first one.
Yep, yep.
You know, during the 1980s when I was at the Army War College, you know, when the Cold War was still very active, and the U.S. Army's major focus was on NATO Europe and, containing the Warsaw Pact and preparing to fight there if that was necessary. You know, you would have American officers, talking about the Soviets in Afghanistan and saying, God, I feel sorry for those poor bastards. No one from Alexander the Great on up has done it. But that doesn't mean there could not have been a few political appointments within the Pentagon. You know, as so many of the neocons had key political appointments in it: Deputy Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary for Policy, control of the Pentagon, the Defense Policy Review Board, the whole collection of them, who were not themselves manipulating this. And it's really, really important to separate individuals in key positions from the interest of the organization as a whole.
Well, Alan, you know Karen Kwiatkowski, the lieutenant colonel?
I don't know her, but she did her doctorate at Catholic University shortly after I taught there. So yes, I know, I'm aware of her.
Yeah, well, she told me that when she was in Office of Special Plans, she was asked to go down and escort a group of Israelis into the Pentagon for briefings. Mm-hmm. When she got to the doorway to meet them, they walked by security when the Americans were not allowed to. They didn't even get asked for identification, and they walked through the Pentagon, knew exactly where they were going, and had all the contacts with, and everybody that you talked about, the people in charge at the different levels were from this Sabbatean Jewish community. And she was shocked by it. You know, Douglas Faith and the rest of these guys that were all working from the White House down, and Donald Kagan and the rest of these guys. All of these people knew the major overall plan of everything and put it into motion. But they put their key people, like you said, compartmentalized them and put them in the right places to do the job.
In fact, look, that is true. And there are actually some more. I actually know Doug Feith. I knew him in Philadelphia and actually worked with him when he had his first political appointment in the Defense Department. He was Deputy Assistant Secretary for, I think, eastern part of NATO, some part of NATO, the Mediterranean. We were working on a Turkey project. But a little story that will fit into this and go back and show just how long it's been around. Back around 1974, a friend of mine, a guy named Al Grishler, had gotten an appointment as the defense LA to Senator Paul Laxalt of Nevada. And I was, on some of my early trips down to Washington, I was going down to Washington. I was going to meet him in the Senate office building where he worked. And we were there talking, and went out and I saw some lights on and went off with a bunch of people talking a foreign language. I thought, that's Hebrew. And there were several people in there. And I said, what's that? And he said, oh, that's Scoop Jackson, Senator Henry Jackson of Washington.
Yeah.
That's his office. He said, Richard Pearl's copying documents for the Israelis. And in the hallway, he said that to me flat out. And I stopped and I said, you're kidding. I said, why doesn't someone have him arrested? And he said, and destroy our career?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, you understand that Pearl was later removed from that position because it became a little too blatant. But that was the sense of it. And, you know, the understanding, and that was like over a third of a century ago.
Yes.
And what strikes me, what really struck me very forcefully on that, not at the time, I should tell you, not at the time, but later when I look back, was how dramatic a shift there had been from the early 1960s, when people like Senator J. William Fulbright of Arkansas could warn about the influence of these organizations and about AIPAC having gone its metamorphosis into AIPAC, you know, and not being registered as an agent of a foreign government. And a John Kennedy, who, whatever his personal failings, and they were manifold, understood at a political level just how bad the nuclearization of the Middle East in terms of the Israeli acquisition of a nuclear capability would be, and may very well have died for it. But to go from that in a dozen years to one where no one would be willing to openly not just criticize, but have punitive measures imposed on an individual, you know, giving classified documentation to a foreign government without fear of being ruined themselves and not having any effect.
Yep.
And that's the big thing. You know, there are a lot of people around, much more I think than is generally understood, who won't be enthusiastic about ruining themselves, but would be willing to accept the possibility of it or the risk of it if it would have some effect. But it was very clear the sense was it would have no effect.
Yeah. Well, Representative Findley, when I interviewed him, said from his earliest time in Congress, he said that it was very clear who was writing most of the important legislation behind the scenes. And he said when you brought it up in mixed company, if you brought it up in mixed company, there would be a fear in the faces of some of the people that you brought it up in front of. And he said these weren't Jewish or Jewish senators or congressmen, but basically people who were frightened to death of that group. And he said, you know, that the fear was palpable because a lot of these people wanted to stake their claim to the pork barrel money and the prestige coming along with a political position that they had, and they didn't want to lose it. And they knew that the biggest donators and the biggest controllers of everything were from the Jewish community, and that continues to this day.
Well, certainly, actually, it's much more than that. And that's one of the consequences of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision and the creation of the super PACs. For all practical purposes, the Adelsons, husband and wife, have bought themselves Newt Gingrich with a $10 million and two $5 million contributions.
Yep.
And that's his campaign, and there were several others in that same line. It's interesting what you said about Paul Finley. I'm trying to think of where I read this. Bear with me just a moment. At 70, memory starts to fail. Who are you, by the way? Unfortunately, the men in my family lived to the high 90s, low hundreds, and working professionally all along, so I can't use that excuse even when I forget my wife's anniversary. But there was a commentary on, and it was an unnamed senator from New England, and he said to this interviewer, he said, I'm aware of what's happening. He said, and if I were to stand up on the floor of the Senate, you understand I'm paraphrasing, this is not a direct quote. If I were to stand up on the floor of the United States Senate and bring this up and discuss what AIPAC has done and what it is doing, I might get 2 or 3 other senators to stand with me. He said, I might. He said, but the consequence would be that nothing I proposed, nothing I initiated, nothing I sponsored would prosper. No legislation, nothing. And it would be my political ruin. The next election, if not before. He says, and that is the leverage. It is not so much a matter of a personal threat, a la Tom Clancy. You'll be walking across the street when you're on the way home and a black car will run over you or you'll just disappear one night. But it was something almost as important, which is the political death. The political ruin and the political failing of everything.
Well, look at Paul Wellstone. They blew him out of the sky for standing up to them. And look at Cynthia McKinney, and look at Max Cleland. These guys were trying to represent the best interests of the country when they were representing their constituency, and they got railroaded. All of them, and some of them killed.
Well, there's very little that can be done at this point on the Hill, and I think we understand that.
Yes.
I suggested in that last piece I did on Veterans Today, Riposte Against Zionism, that one thing I think is really important, and I put a link to a YouTube video about a Marine Corps veteran calling a congressman to heel on various healthcare and school issues. And it wasn't that the issue was that important, but almost every member of Congress, at least in the House, and occasionally senators, have to do town meetings, at least when you're coming up for election. They have to do them. They have to meet the constituents. And it is at a time and in a setting where they cannot turn to their staff, where the lobbyists can't reach out their hand and say, this is the way to answer. They're up there, and very few of these people are good at anything except holding on to their jobs.
Yes.
And what this person did, this veteran did, and I think it's important for any listeners to understand that this can in fact be done. What this person did is that he began by saying something, that I want to say, given the circumstances of this meeting, that I'm a Marine Corps vet, and of course there was applause from the audience, and that's big applause. And that did 2 things. One, it staked out his personal legitimacy to the audience, and 2, since very few members of Congress, either house, either party, are military veterans, it put them in a position where they dare not either ignore or insult this man without having the audience rip them to shreds.
Yeah.
So, start with your veterans. Have your veterans take the lead on this. And then second, he just ripped him, openly ripped him, and the congressman was up there, stuttering and hemming and hawing, and you see him glancing to the side, and his staff can't do anything. It is no staff member sitting behind you or standing behind you whispering in your ear telling you how to answer. You do that, and that's a sign of political death. Because even if the mainstream media in America is largely Zionist-controlled, most of the local media, except in some selected cities, like New York, is not. They have their own agendas, and there's a raft of potential competitors out there for any one of these elected representatives and senators. And if they try to avoid it, they're going to get shredded locally.
Yeah.
So that's it. Go at these people. Don't talk about don't write to Congress, and don't walk into a Washington D.C. office. And don't ask for a congressional investigation. I mean, this is their center of power. So they're in their power base. Nothing you do out from the outside will have any direct effect upon them in that power base. But hit them in their local constituencies. Hit them where they can't evade, run away, look to their staff, where the lobbyists may be sitting there biting their nails, but they can't do anything, not in that audience, and humiliate them. Humiliate them and demand answers right there. If they vote for it, ask them to make an answer. Don't let them get away with not doing it. That's where you can have an effect on Congress.
It's interesting, that there are, in your discussion right now, or in your presentation of that answer there, Alan, is that a hope that America is going to hold together long enough for any of this to matter. And frankly, we'll go back to the finance, which you don't have all that much love for, but the financial story says that we don't, and that a failure of the dollar system is, if not imminent, it's just around the corner. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Well, when that happens, when that failure happens, we're going to splinter and fracture as a nation in ways that the American people are not prepared for. If one thing alone should shock people. We've got 1 out of every 5 people, or 20%, on some sort of mind-altering drug or chemical like Prozac or Elaril or something else. We have over 40% of them receiving some kind of direct assistance from the federal government. We have 52 million now people on food stamps. We have 350 million guns. Now, if the dollar system fails, or there's a bank holiday, or one of these things happens, or a combination of them happens, drug deliveries to your local pharmacy will stop. And these nut jobs that have been on this medication for the last umpteen years will all turn psychotic. The people needing food will, because most people only have a few days' food in their homes. As soon as that week of mayhem starts and food deliveries don't go to their grocery store and everything's been picked clean like vultures, people are going to start going bonkers. And the level of poverty already in places like Detroit and Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and Lowell, Massachusetts, or it doesn't matter where you look, Fall River. You can go down south even, Miami now with the foreclosure mess that's going on, Las Vegas. You don't think these places are going to erupt in the kinds of things that we've only read about in other societies. But this time it's going to be worse because those other societies didn't have 350 million guns in private hands. And I've got to tell you, I don't know how bad, but I don't think it's going to be good, Alan.
Well, it's probably not going to be very good. It's ironic. Yesterday I was talking to my wife, a veterinarian, about some of these things, and we have a farm in Pennsylvania, to which we're going to be moving very shortly. Liking the idea of a farm in a rural area where we have our own fruit trees and crops and things like this.
Yes.
I said, this is just as impressionistically, and I'm emphasizing that because if I make a mistake talking about a subject that I do not know well, I want people to understand that it's not willful misrepresentation, it's just a lack of understanding. As I said, finance and finance capital is not something I specialize in or look at in great detail. But I said, if I look at this, when I look at the national debt and the projections on the national debt and the cost of debt service, nothing being proposed by any candidate of either party, with or without a super committee or a super Congress or anything else, is going to affect that in any material way.
That's right.
And that projections for a decrease in the annual deficit over the next 20 years are utterly specious, because no subsequent Congress or president would be predisposed to be affected or obligated to carry it out. Look at McCain-Feinstein. Went nowhere.
Yep.
Nowhere. And that the result of that, and particularly the cost of debt service, is going to be something that will make the 1929 Great Depression seem like a Tea Party.
That's right. Well, we're, everybody thinks we're in hardship now, which this is just the warm up, and they all know this. Excuse me. They all know this. Everyone who's been involved in studying this, as I have for the last almost going on 9 years now. When you take a look at where we are today from where we were 9 years ago, it's a steady march, and so if I'm circumspect about the way these things have taken place and how everything has come together for them, the criminals, they are planning a lockdown of America. Now, that means nobody in, nobody out. That means, it's going to be a Soviet-style implosion. What happened in the 1917 implosion that finally took hold in the 20s, and all of the Ukraine starvations and the draconian laws that were passed and the things that went on there are going to revisit the United States. And frankly, I don't see any of the people that in the masses that are ready to stand up and stop it. Now there is a growing undercurrent of dissension in the country and anger. How can we get that to be more aggressive in changing things? One of the things you said was, affronting these people directly, these senators and congressmen especially, and your local politicians. But more than that, I think people should start planning for the aftermath of the failure, because out of that dust and failure is going to rise a new republic if the right people can get their act together. Because the failure is a foregone conclusion in my mind. What I'm talking about now is preparing our plan for after that takes place, so that we can be the writers of the next republic.
Well, one of the things that makes the difference between what's likely to happen and your mention on the Soviet case. I recalled reading at one point a comment by a fellow named Sabrosky Yamamoto, admiral of the Japanese fleet, which at the time in the United States, and he said, I would never invade the United States. There would be a gun behind every blade of grass. And when you talk about the numbers of weapons in this country, that's a situation that has never existed in any previous attempt by a political movement to take over and impose a totalitarian regime.
You're right.
The Russian populace wasn't walking around with breech-loading rifles and muskets. And exactly the same phenomenon that of a very heavily armed America is neutralized by its ignorance, by being kept in ignorance.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
But there are very sharp limits, and living down here in Mississippi, which is as I do now, which is a very small state, a very rural state, and a very heavily armed state.
Yep.
I would really, really, really hate to come into Mississippi or Alabama and directly impose some type of overt authoritarian order. It would be very hazardous to the health of the people who are doing it.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, but this...
No, I understand. A lot of what you're discussing, which is sort of away from the 9/11 context, a lot of what you're discussing absolutely requires not only incrementalism, which is what's happening,
Yes.
where you gradually get used to it, but also, the Soviets called this a maskurovka, in Soviet strategies, a maskurovka, a very elaborate masquerade, to conceal what's happening from those viewing it. And that's why I am so strong on feeling that, you can't talk to most people about the mechanisms of an international cabal or a finance capital or international financiers, because most people don't understand it. I mean, I'm not that dumb a guy, but when I start looking at high finance, my eyes start glazing over. They really do.
Yeah.
But they don't glaze over when I look at 9/11. Because that has something very real, and not only has money going out, it has bodies coming home. And regardless of what we're doing to other people, what matters to Americans, as it does to every other people of every other country now and past, is what happens to them. And, burying a dozen kids from your hometown who have died in the foreign wars, which are the spin-off of 9/11, means a lot more than whatever happened to Baghdad or Kabul or anything else.
But I think, Alan, what you said before, I think the American public knows the story that was told to them by the government is not true. They know that. I would say that that's probably a majority. However,
I think they suspect, but they don't understand the details, and they don't understand the provenance.
Well, but let me ask you this: why is it then, Alan, that they don't have the general curiosity to want to find out? If somebody said to me today that Fukushima was actually a product of the Stuxnet virus and nuclear devices that went off that were pre-positioned. Now, my first response would be impossible, couldn't be. But then I'd say to myself, well, geez, maybe I should look into this. Well, when you look into it, you'd find out that that's probably not far from the truth. And my point is that I have an intellectual curiosity that drives me to want to see whether these things are true or aren't, but most Americans do not.
You don't even have to say most Americans. Most people anywhere, anyone in history have not.
So what do we do then? Would we have to starve them before they're interested?
No. The thing that makes it so difficult in America, let's just say in the American case on 9/11, I think that there is a suspicion more than a certainty that all is not as people are told.
Yes.
Let me tell you a very true story on this, to give you an example. Last July, just after I did the Press TV interview, the day after the Press TV interview, I went to State College, Pennsylvania, which is probably best known here for the Penn State football scandal, but that was not why I was there. I had been invited by the pastor of probably the largest evangelical Christian church in Pennsylvania. It was an Assemblies of God congregation, which, by the way, is the same, not the same church, same congregation, but the same church to which Sarah Palin belongs.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted me to talk on 9/11. He himself had questions about it, and he had run into some of my published work on Veterans Today, and I think one of the interviews of the one I did with you, and also one I've done with Phil Shorney and Mark Glenn.
Yep.
I have no idea how he came to look at these or how he came to his suspicions. We didn't talk about the provenance of his doubt, but we talked about it, and so he brought me up there. And it wasn't a talk to the congregation. It was a talk to the ministers of the church
Yep.
And a number of the lay leaders, and I think there were two or three ministers from other churches in that area who were invited in, to listen to me. And it was interesting because what he told me beforehand is that the Assemblies of God, and I don't honestly know if this applies to all evangelical churches or just to this specific church. He said they have a belief in both American exceptionalism and Israeli exceptionalism, and they end their services with a prayer for the United States and for Israel. So this was, to put it mildly, a tough audience, okay? And a lot of these people were all educated, many fairly knowledgeable, but I think only the pastor who invited me up there had really looked at 9/11 in detail. And so I did a presentation with a slideshow and some multimedia clips that I had set aside, and then a long Q&A period. Began by talking about my own background. When I mentioned the Marines, there were approving nods. This is good. You can't hurt yourself by calling yourself a Marine before a conservative American officer.
Well, yes, you can if you're in an audience of Navy men like myself.
Well, only if you weren't a corpsman. If you were a Navy corpsman, you can get away with it. We all joke about that, and it's one of the things, though, that calling yourself a veteran, identifying yourself as a veteran before a conservative audience, regardless of your service, is not going to hurt it.
That's right. Yep.
And in fact, I found that to them, when we were talking later, that was more important than my academic credentials.
Yes.
That like you put on a uniform, you picked up a weapon, you went out and did it. You can't be bad. You might not be right, but you can't be bad. And then I went into a discussion of, and by the way, I'm doing this both to tell you a tale and also to perhaps give some suggestions to people listening to this later as ways that they might make a difference. Help make a difference.
Yeah.
And I said, when I started, I was a supporter of Israel. This was in the 1960s as a young Marine. I was a supporter of Israel. I said there were, not on religious grounds, but there were guys like one of the Israeli generals named Moshe Dayan, who was, one of my pantheon of military heroes. But then I also liked Robert E. Lee and Erwin Rommel. So, who's to say for my taste in this? But then what started to change my point of view on it was the USS Liberty incident.
Yes.
And when it happened, I was in Vietnam. And I was, shall we say, preoccupied with other issues. And later in the 70s, when I understood what happened, my views changed dramatically. I did not like people who attacked our ships and killed our people. And I showed this audience, there was probably about 50, 60 people there. I showed this audience, a detailed clip of some of the stuff that I've actually published in a piece on the USS Liberty, showing the profiles of the ship, the photos, what the planes would have seen. I said, you have to understand with the technology of the day, line of sight dumb rockets and aircraft cannons, you had to see it close before planes could use their weapons. And I said, and this is what they would have seen, and this is what the government said our government allowed them to get away with. None of them had heard of it.
Yep.
Now, one of them had heard of it.
Yep.
And that was the energizer. That got their attention. They had actually done it. That got their attention. That's the pump primer. And then I went into a discussion of 9/11. Talked about the background to it, showed clips with media reports on 9/11 of secondary explosions at the base of the Twin Towers. I said, planes taking 1,000 feet up do not cause secondary explosions an hour later at the base of these buildings. showed them the clip on WTC7, and then went and talked about the presence of the TNAC alums in the government, the role of the media. I said, now the thing to ask yourself is why the media did not shred the government case, as they did the government case on Vietnam, for example, and so many other government issues. And I said it's because the ownership of the media, of the mainstream media, either knew, suspected, or feared that the evidentiary trail would lead directly back to Israel and to their associates, the neocons in the U.S. government. After my talk, there were a lot of really unhappy people there. After that, a couple of days later, when I was back home, I got an email from the pastor, and he said, we had a long discussion the following day about this, and in church on Sunday, in which I was not present, so I'm just relying on what he told me. And he said, after your talk, all but one person understood that the U.S. government case was either a gross misrepresentation or an outright lie. And over half accepted Israel's complicity. Now, for a group believing that by theology is committed to believing in Israeli exceptionalism and that ends their services with a prayer for Israel, I thought that was a pretty phenomenal.
Well, let me ask you this though: have any of them since that speech, that talk, gotten back to you and said, "What can we do to get the truth out?" Has anybody other than that pastor shown a ancillary interest in doing something to change it?
A number of them, and in fact, I sent them all the Riposte Against Zionism piece. Mm-hmm. This is the line. After that, I haven't been in touch with them. I hadn't had any read to, but I said, read this. This is a good example of what you can use. And for your listeners, the article is Riposte Against Zionism, and it's on the Veterans Today website. Just do a search for it. And it's been reprinted in a large number of places. It's a very, very, very detailed how to get out there and do it. And also, by the way, a commentary on how not to do it, which is don't shovel unarmed convoys to Gaza. Don't have a global conference meeting in Jerusalem. Don't run off the political cliffs like lemmings bouncing around. Very detailed assessment of what can be done in a practical, political, low-cost exercise within the United States. You have to understand, well, I'm sure you do, but one has to understand that disorganized suspicion isn't enough to change things.
That's right. That's right.
And that's what you have here. You have this in America. You have disorganized suspicion.
Yeah.
And one of the things that keeps it from being organized is that politicians, media pundits, and an enormous number of pastors, particularly evangelical pastors, are continuing to parrot the official government case.
Yeah.
19 weaned Arabs on 4 planes. It's those nasty Muslims. Let's go get them. I mean, that's the message that goes out. And because of that, it's very difficult for people having that constant theme being put to them to do anything substantially different. So my argument, start with local veteran posts. Start making these presentations to local veteran folks. I put together a couple of slideshows, and I'm happy to send background information to anyone. Start there. That this, the Tea Party showed in America, whether we like what it did or not, but how it's possible for a grassroots movement to explode in very short order and do an awful lot.
Well, and it also shows how the elites can usurp the controls of a movement and turn it into their own control, which is exactly what happened at the Tea Party. So then we get the Occupy movement, right? And this goes out with great hopes. And I've got some people, of course, if you've been to my website, I've got over 45 books that have been written over the last few hundred years about the criminal group that we're talking about. So if you come to my website, you're a master's level or even a doctorate level understanding of criminal Zionism. Here's the problem. I've got these guys at Occupy trying to show up with my information, and they get attacked. I mean, literally, physically. They had their placards ripped down. They had themselves pushed out of the group. They were screamed off the stage in every place that they showed up. And so these people already were on the ground directing these Occupy movement things to stay away from Zionism, criminal Israel, neocons, any of that stuff. They had to stay away from it like the plague. So we didn't penetrate with the truth in those instances. Now that doesn't mean that the story hasn't come out, Alan. It has, because when I was saying this stuff 8 years ago, I was saying this Zionist stuff 8 years ago, and I brought up the first person to bring up Rothschild on the alternative media was me. And I said it's his financial juggernaut that's killing the country. His associations with Rothman and with Strauss-Kahn and with John Kerry Kahn and all these the Heinz Fortunes and all these different billionaires. And by the way, 7 out of 10 billionaires in the world come from this community.
Oh, really?
7 out of 10, yeah. 70% of the world's billionaires are Sabbatean Jews. And they're only, and listen to this, they're 0.2% of the world population, but they're 70% of the billionaires.
So where did my paternal grandmother go wrong?
Well, she was a Torah. She was probably a Torah Jew, which is somebody who believed in the Torah, and the Torah is the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the Torah. Well, and there are some exceptions within the Old Testament where they say love only 3 times in the Old Testament, but they say revenge and kill over 1,000. So the Jews have always had this kind of psychopathic approach to spiritualism. However, it never went awry until we had this Talmudic / Kabbalistic / Sabbatean Khazarian connection to the Zohar, and the rabbis wrote down that it's okay to a rabbi you can still be a rabbi if you had sex with a child under 3 years of age, because it wouldn't be blah. I mean, these things are actually written down in the Talmud. And that kind of stuff sets people up. Now, the ostentatious nature of this group is sickening. People having $15 million bar mitzvahs in the Rainbow Room of New York, or where they take brand new Rossignol skis and use them as centerpieces on everybody's table.
It sounds almost like something the Kardashians would do.
Well, yeah. But yes, but they happen to be from that community. The point I'm trying to make here is this. You can't go out and teach the masses this stuff. What we've done, though, I can talk about this stuff and not be roundly attacked anymore. The seeds that I sowed 8 years ago about Zionism have grown, and it's all over the net now. Nobody gives me credit for being one of the forerunners, because I didn't start this. I mean, Eustace Mullins was before me, and Ezra Pound was before that, and Pakita Deshishnerev was before me, and all of the different writers, and Nesta Webster and all of these people, they all had this stuff sussed out long before me. What I did was take the new medium of the internet and popularize the information. Now what we've got to do is take that popularization and start to feed it into the lower levels so that this can become a juggernaut. And it can be, because now people's blinders have been taken off. The idea that America is this prosperous country where a land of opportunity is finished. They're watching corruption at every level. They're watching the rot at every level, and people are not as patriotic in their hearts as they once were, and they're prime for the truth. they are primed for the truth. And people that would have turned you away 2 years ago very well may not today if you approach them with these facts. We are gaining converts. Whether it will be enough to change the immediate nature of our demise, it will not. I don't believe it will, because the financial system is failing, and it's designed to fail. I'm saying that during the time of the tumult, of the problems that we face in the next 10 years, that's when these truths have to be put into hard copy, like you've done with your presentation, Alan, put into paper form, because the Internet's not going to be putting it out anymore. That'll be done. And this has to spread like wildfire across the country, where the institutions of criminal Zionism are dismantled by hand, by the people. And these are the ways that we're going to be able to do this. And pointing the finger at the right people. Now, I've always been an advocate of pointing the finger at the real criminals. But here's the problem I've had, and maybe you can either mirror this or not. In the Jewish community, people who know that their community has been committing criminal acts within the political structure never say a word, because by and large they're benefiting largely from it. And very few people like Gilad Osman and yourself or others like Benjamin Friedman, who had this stuff sussed out in 1960. These people are few and far between. So if you know the truth and say nothing, are you complicit in the crime, or are you just a coward, or both? I mean, where do we draw the line at saying, you knew about this stuff? I'll tell you another person. When I was at New York University studying, I had friends of mine from the Jewish community. You can't live in New York and not have friends who are Jewish. I showed my friend all of the facts, and she was an Israeli, in fact, okay, and she lived in New York, and I showed her all the facts, and she just looked at me and said, I don't believe any of it. So I showed her more facts, and she said, look, I don't believe it. The third time I showed her stuff, she said, I didn't read the stuff. I said, why? She says, because I don't have to. And I said, what do you mean you don't have to read it? I said, of course you have to read it. Don't you have an interest in finding out the facts about what your community is doing? She said, I don't believe it, and I'm not reading any more of the stuff. I'm not reading it, blah, blah, blah. I said, our friendship's over. Friendship's over. Terminated. Finished. Done with. You're complicit. You are complicit in the crimes. And as far as I'm concerned, you're my enemy now, because you're killing my country and very well may end up killing me. Do you understand the gravity of the decisions that are going to have to be made in the next 10 years in order to eradicate this problem? It's awful. And some people just don't have a stomach for it, and other people do. But we can't get rid of this problem. Alan, this same Sabbatean group's been kicked out of over 120 countries in their existence. That's not a mistake. This is not diaspora stuff, we're talking about. We're talking about a group of people who understand the rudiments of usury and descend upon a nation, and within a generation have that place completely enslaved under their usury system. And they did it in France, they did it in England, they did it in Spain, they did it in Italy, they did it, across Europe and into America. They've done it through in Canada. How do you deal with this kind of group and not get the wrong people convicted? This is a big question, because you don't want to hurt people that don't deserve it.
That's very true, but it's also a problem in that most of the issues, whether it's of finance or international cabals or historical activity, aren't the sort of thing you can sell to the American people. Partly because the message is too complicated for the average person to pay attention, and partly because they won't bother paying attention to it.
Yeah.
And let me take it into a different vein, but one that parallels what you're talking about. I have set a fair number of people on a lot of the websites that I publish on by saying, you need to stop talking about Palestine and Gaza, because after half a century of political socialization by everything from Hollywood and its movies to New York and its studios to the media in America, the American people don't care. Even if they knew exactly what the Israelis were doing to Palestine and what they had done to Gaza, most of them wouldn't care. first of all, they probably wouldn't believe it, and second, they wouldn't care no matter what you showed them. I said, but that's not the issue. The issue is Israeli militancy and militarism. That's the focus. And that if you focus on something that matters to the American people, which is 9/11 and the wars it spawned, and all of the lives and treasure that have been spent on that, and if Israel is held to account for that, then everything else becomes a lesser included case. Because if the American people look at Israel and say, you did it, all the rest of it isn't going to matter. None of the rest of it, as far as Israel is concerned, will matter. Now, that won't deal with finance, international finance. That's not something I look at, as I told you, or deal with. But in terms of Israel as a state and its militancy, bringing them before the bar of justice on 9/11, that will include almost everything else.
Well, I think you're right about that, and I'll tell you, my website is definitely not for the newbie, for the debutante. And when you're coming into this information, and you go to the books, there are some books in there. One by a guy named Archibald Maul Ramsey. He was a graduate of Eton School and of Sandhurst. And he figured out this conspiracy over 100 years ago, not 100 years ago, about 90 years ago. And he wrote about it, and they put him in prison for it, okay? He wrote a book called The Nameless War, and it's a short book, 110 pages. But it really gives you an idea of how ensconced this criminal gang has become in both Britain, Canada, Australia, the United States, and all of the Anglophile world, because they use the British crown and the British control over much of the globe to send out their tentacles of control everywhere through Cecil B. Rhodes and the Round Table. They used Rothschild money to go down and completely destroy the Afrikaner nation with the Boer War and so forth. And when you start taking a look at how they've been able to do this, you can see what's coming for America very clearly, because they don't vary very far from their game plan that has worked for them. And our benefit, Alan, and I think you may agree, we can move quickly with our assaults on their allies. And this, I think we've kept false flag attacks from happening because of our speed at getting to things, such as putting the Enterprise, which is in mothballs already, instead of decommissioning it, sending it to the Persian Gulf, as if that's not going to be used as a false flag attack to blame Iran. We've got the word out on that, and now it's not just an idea in people's mind. It has circulated into the mainstream, and there have been articles about it. It's been on RT, Russian television. It's been on, people have questioned that movement of that ship around the globe. It may have taken away the ability for them to do that. So we're moving quickly because we know the game. The game is easy to spot now, Alan. You're right. To get the rank and file on board with us, we're going to have to keep it simple. 9/11 is the real touchstone to the truth, I believe, and I think you're right about that. I do.
Yeah. It is because it's the sort of thing. And the one thing that I mentioned to some of my friends after that talk I gave is that before that, I really didn't think that something like the USS Liberty would really matter to an American audience today, because, it was, in fact, many years ago. And all of the key participants at a decision-making level, in both Israel and the United States, are dead. They're gone.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, and I changed after that presentation, because I'll tell you, that audience's attention, looking at the USS Liberty, their attention was just riveted by it. Because this was something that wasn't he said, they said, we said, actual fact happened, there's the ship, that's what it looked like, these were the attackers, this is what the U.S. government did, or rather did not do, pull back the air groups going to its defense. That got their attention.
Well, you might be interested to listen to James Innes, the officer of the deck, during the attack. I've interviewed him 4 or 5 times on the French Connection, and he was one of the people that no one else had interviewed or has since, because after I got done making him popular, he got his life threatened. Well, I made him infamous, and the problem was after he became infamous from doing my programming, his life was threatened, and so was his wife's.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he just...
I read his book. I read, in fact, his book. I read his book after I had first been informed in the mid-'70s in Washington by a friend on the Navy staff what had happened. He said, you might want to look at this.
Yep.
It was a communications traffic from the Liberty, and I went, not what I had been told. And then some point after that, I read his book, and I thought, oh, tell me, It's not that a country can do this, it's that it can get away with it.
Well, it just shows you how ensconced into all levels of power they've become, and that is not unique to America. That's one thing that people in America need to understand. We've got Nicolas Sarkozy, whose grandfather was responsible for the implosion of the caliphate in Turkey, and now he's the president of France. And we've got people, involved in the Spanish control and in Portuguese control, where we've got Marrano Jews in charge of Portugal, and then the connections into Goldman Sachs, of course, which is the financial arm of the Rothschild fortune in the United States, and J.P. Morgan. Once you start,
Don't be too hard on Sarkozy. Anyone who says he doesn't trust Netanyahu isn't all bad.
Well, they do a lot of that stuff. They do a lot of that stuff for private, for public consumption. Here's the other thing. A lot of people believe that there is an opposition out there against this group, and there simply isn't. In fact, Putin has never shown himself to be on the side of truth ever. He could have blown the top off of 9/11 with one speech. The truth of the matter is when he took the holdings away from the oligarchs that had stolen the billions, he didn't put any of them except one in jail. The rest of them kept their many, many billions. Many live in Israel now. He turned over those assets to Rothschild, including the gold, including the Luke oil, including Yukos oil, and it's all Kabbalistic Jews that run that whole country's financial system again. It's never changed. And see, everybody thinks, Putin, he's going to save us, and he's going to stand up for Syria. He's the false opposition that they own, because they can't have an ideological battle go on in their press without having a bad guy. And they always have selected out a bad guy, and during the Cold War, we had people like Armand Hammer going across into Moscow with all kinds of secret stuff coming directly from the British intelligence and from CIA and NSA, directly into the hands of the Russians. You'll note, this is interesting, you'll note, when they designed their own computer in Russia, it looked exactly like an American design, like the Atari that came out. When they built a space shuttle, they had an exact replica of our space shuttle, except it had little gill wings on the front of it, but it was a spit image of ours. The technologies that were going across and the monies that were being paid for, back when you were studying the Warsaw Pact, we were sending them wheat to keep them fed. Giving them sweetheart deals on American grains and the rest of it. It's all a nonsense, and it's pablum for the masses. And they have to keep this fraud, this charade going in order to make it seem like they are the good guys and these are the bad guys and the rest of it. It's just nonsense. And I've been around this mess long enough to realize it's like the Arab Spring. I'll give you a good example. We got the Muslim Brotherhood taking over in Egypt, right? Nobody has the brains to look back to the 1960s when the Muslim Brotherhood was formed by the intelligence services in Britain and the Americas. And that this group's at the very top of the Muslim Brotherhood still has their allegiances to MI6. And, and now the Arab Spring was supposedly spontaneous. Nonsense. I mean, come on. But see, this is what people actually believe, Alan. Alan?
Yes, I'm here. I'm listening to you. Go ahead.
Well, I just don't understand how because to me now, after so many years of looking at this, it's kind of hard to blow smoke up my skirt now. And when I see things like the Muslim Brotherhood, and I say, okay, who are these people? And then you find out they're financed with this money and that money out of Britain, and it was formed in London, and it was part of the, but then you start looking into the IRA and how it had people from MI6 and MI5 infiltrated, and the Oma bombing was helped by them, and you take a look at the FBI doing the World Trade Center attack in '93, and they're the people who put up the guy for it and helped him find the bomb and got him all set up, and you start looking at this stuff and you say to yourself, why would they do that? Well, they need an opposition. They need, in the FBI's case, they needed a homegrown terrorist threat. These shootings, Columbine, we know darn well that there wasn't these three kids. There were all kinds of people shooting those people in Columbine. We know the people down in Australia that killed all those people in Hobart. We know darn well that was all put on so that they could confiscate Australian guns. We know that the group that did it up in Scotland was a way to confiscate weapons, which is exactly what the legislation did in Britain. And we know that the bombings and stuff that happened in Britain were so they could put a surveillance society in place and have over 4 million active cameras in the country. And right now they're going to double it. So my point is that once you look behind all this stuff and find out that your own government was doing this stuff to you, whether it be in Britain, Australia, America, France, you start saying to yourself, holy smokes, we've been going down this road to perdition for a very, very long time. Any comments on that?
No, and that's why there is a tendency, I think, on the part of many people who do know a great deal about the history, even if I don't know much about finance, but who do know a great deal about the history. There's a tendency to over-intellectualize the argument. To say that there are so many facets to this. The American people just have to understand it, and they don't. You need to pick one or two things that they can understand.
I agree.
Without undergoing an enormous conversion, an intellectual and emotional conversion. It's because there's something. It's like with students. If you try and ask them to learn too much that involves unlearning what they know, they're going to turn off. You're going to get nothing. You're going to get no movement at all. They may begin to question somewhat what they have been taught to date, but they will not accept whatever new is being presented to them. So that's the danger. I see no indication, having said everything that I have at this point about what should be done, what has to be done, the way to do it. It's been about 6 months since I started writing and talking about this, in detail. Absolutely nothing has happened. A lot of people said, attaboy, that's it. We can do it, we agree, and then let's go put together another conference, which does nothing.
Has anybody approached you trying to get more going other than what's happened? I mean, or has anybody threatened you since?
Neither one.
They just kind of ignore you and hope you'll go away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, Alan, when I first started speaking about this, I did have people rummaging through my rubbish cans at 3 a.m., and I did have people following me. I still do. When I leave my home here, there are often people shadowing me and stuff, and it's not because I'm paranoid that they're there. They're there. And my phone, the people who get this broadcast first, because this is taped, is French intelligence, because they've got me on a permanent taping system. I'm sure of this. So the point I'm trying to make is that they keep tabs, but they hope that by ignoring me or by spreading negative stories about me and making them go global or go viral on the internet, that somehow I will be discredited or whatever. And it's worked. they've done a good job, and you know, my love for a couple of whacks of moonshine on occasion has not helped, but that hasn't stopped the fact that this information has gone out. If you look now at the number of places where Zionism is being discussed or being honestly looked at in relation to 9/11 or other subjects, the truth of the matter is it is exploding globally, and Israel is despised. In France, I'll give you an example. They cannot sell their avocados in France. They can't sell their fruit, their oranges. They can't sell the brands from them. If anybody finds out it's Israeli, it sits there and rots on the shelf.
So what you're saying is that actually the BDS movement is having more of an effect than we generally hear about.
Well, yes, and if I see somebody in the store reaching for an avocado from Israel, and Carrefour, which is a Jewish Zionist-owned company, still puts them out there, I say, oh, that's Israeli. I wouldn't eat that if at gunpoint. I tell them. They've just murdering people wholesale, and the old lady that's trying to buy it will look at me and put it back. But nobody is buying it. And they keep cutting the price of it down to like nothing. And, you know, the truth of the matter is that we are having an effect, and I don't want to understate our effect. However, is it a little too is it too little, too late? Well, that remains to be seen. And as I said during our conversation, Alan, I think a lot of this is going to be sussed out in the dust and mire of our next big mess, which is the martial law part of the horror. And that's coming for the United States, but it probably is coming for Europe if you've been reading the newspapers. I don't think we're far behind over here with the euro being imploded and the rest of it. I mean, my goodness, I don't hold out much hope for this place either. So, I don't know. Anyway, I want to give you the last word. We have talked a lot about so many things, because I want to give a little bit to my listening audience, which is a very well-educated audience. I also want to give an idea to people who are just starting out and trying to get this word out. And so you've done a good job of kind of straddling both subjects, Alan, and I appreciate that very much. It's been an honor to have you on once again. You're a good example for other people, especially people who've come from the inside of this construct and fought your way out. It's laudable. You should be very proud of yourself, and I'm very proud to have you on my show. Really.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much.
Well, do you have a last statement for everybody before we call this a program?
Yeah, I would. Remember, focus on veterans, focus on the local level. It doesn't matter what country you're in or what the specific issue is. Find a specific issue that matters within your country. Don't look to your national capitals or your national legislature. Those are the ones who are most vulnerable to their influence.
Yep.
Go to local communities, go to local veterans organizations, go to local trade unions, which often tend to be, except on economic issues, very conservative politically in America, and perhaps in some other countries. Go local, go low, go simple, one message, one issue, one message, one theme at the local level, and you can build. You can build very fast.
I agree with all of that 100%. And I think it's true here in France, it's true in Spain, it's true in Greece, it's true in the United States, Canada, wherever you speak about it. Because essentially, we all live locally. I don't live in Paris. I don't care what they do there. You don't live in Washington, D.C. Nobody does, unless you're part of the crime gang. So you're absolutely right. This is a grassroots thing, and ultimately, when things do get worse, it's grassroots that's going to help you get through it.
Absolutely.
So it's a win-win all the way around, ladies and gentlemen. Keep yourself safe, Alan. I'm very grateful. I will have you on again if you're willing, maybe in 6 weeks or so, if you've got the time.
I'd be delighted.
Well, what we'll do is I'll maybe send you a subject that you can chew over, or you can send me something. We'll pick something a little more specific than this conversation.
Better still, send me a large package of French bread and cheese.
I'll tell you something. They do have very good cheese here.
Oh, I know. Not only that, I was down in Carcassonne many years ago, and in addition to looking at the fortifications, saying, not even with modern weapons would I care to attack that. So, God, the bakeries around there, to die for.
Well, honestly, my wife bakes all our own bread here. We do our own baking, and we make our own cheese.
Then it will be easy for you to send me a package of bread and cheese.
Well, it would be, because I have a neighbor who milks their cows to feed it to their fresh veal, and I get some of their milk, which we convert into cheese, and then I age it and make it my own cheeses. So, everything I do here, I got my own garden, my own food, my own fruit trees, just like you said, what you're going to try to do in Pennsylvania. I would recommend, Alan, between you and I, to get that underway as quickly as possible, because I don't know how much longer this mess is going to stay afloat here.
Well, Daryl, to show you my basic commitment to capitalism, as soon as I receive a package of bread and cheese from you, we can schedule the next interview.
I don't know if they'll let the cheese through. Everybody in the post office will say, "What in the hell is in this box?"
Not my problem.
Well, you do know that French cheese stinks pretty bad, don't you? Alan, I'll talk to you again, my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, that's Alan Sabrosky, Dr. Alan Sabrosky, and of course my name is Daryl Bradford Smith. And until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care of the people around you. Again, this is a grassroots movement, and make sure the people that you care about the most are safe, and reach around your community and make sure that the people that you're going to need in the very near future are also safe and up to speed. Until the next time, this is Daryl Bradford Smith telling you all, please be well. Bye-bye now.